a total of 60 volunteers for blood donation. So inshallah, if all of the mu'mineen mu'minat can inshallah partake. I unfortunately will not be able to partake because my understanding is, being not from the country, they will not allow me, and therefore maybe inshallah one of the brothers or sisters can give blood on my behalf, inshallah. Salawat ala Muhammad wa أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيدنا الممجد بشير المصدق المصطفى الأمجد محمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين أما بعد قالوا أبا عبد الله الحسين صلوات الله وسلامه عليه إني لم أخرج أشيرا ولا بطلا ولا مفسدا ولا ظالما وإنما خرجت لطلب الإصلاح في أمة جدي محمد صلى الله عليه وآله أريد أن آمر بالمعروف وأنهى عن المنكر وأسير بسيرة جدي محمد أسير بعلي بن أبي طالب صلوات على محمد Awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, my respected teachers, elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. أعظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمصابنا أبي عبد الله حسين صلوات الله وسلامه عليه. Our discussions concerning the prophetic model, understanding the way in which our Holy Prophet of Islam, Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, left for us a criterion in order to live by. So far, the conclusions that we have come to are the following. First and foremost, that in order for Rasulullah to become successful, he needed to create a trajectory of growth from a point in which he commenced his mission to a point of completion, wholesomeness for his community and humanity at large. He needed to be able to appeal to every demographic of the community, irrespective of gender, irrespective of color, irrespective of ethnicity, irrespective of religion, in order to make those reformations. A person and a point where everybody felt they could come together, and through that unification could bring around that change within his society. We also stated that in order for the Holy Prophet of Islam to be able to achieve these kinds of accomplishments, he needs to have a certain personality, which we have called the prophetic personality. And here, the last 2 nights, we have been discussing this personality, the way in which Rasulullah engaged with people, the way in which he was able to institute those changes within his society. What was it about his personality that was so endearing to every type of person that he came to? We stated first and foremost that the prophetic personality is one that does not send away people. Rather, it is a person that draws people towards them. They are like gravity, and they are having a gravitational pull of everyone and everything towards them. We highlighted from the story of Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, twice in the Holy Quran, he has a famous statement where he says, وَمَا أَنَا بِطَارِدِ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. I do not send away those people who believe. I am someone who brings people together, irrespective of how rich, how famous, how beautiful, how ugly anyone is. I'm a point of attraction and not repulsion for people. And so that personality we divided into 3. The first part of that personality was someone who understood people at their own level. He spoke to people at their own level. He understood children for who they were. he understood a munafiq for who he was, and so being able to appreciate the reality of another person and his own reality, was able to bridge that gap between two people. This is hugely important for anyone who wishes to be able to make their religion appealing towards other people. The second facet of the prophetic personality is one whereby the Prophet sought to get the best out of people. Again, irrespective of who you are. You may be a mu'min, you may be a Muslim, you may be a Christian, it doesn't matter. As long as the Prophet is bringing you out of darkness and into light, from weakness and into strength, from disarray towards unity, this is how the Prophet takes a person from stage to stage in their own growth and existence. The third facet of a prophetic personality is someone who leaves their scent in the heart of an individual. Meaning that even if the person isn't physically there with you, he has managed to sow a seed in your heart, and you are the one who pours that water and lets that seed flourish that has been planted in the heart. This is the way in which our A'immah, salamullahi alayhim ajma'een, dealt with people. And this was the personality in order to be able to bring people towards them and not to repulse them. Here we want to conclude on this point, just unpack it slightly more, and then move into the next phase of our series and discussions, inshallah. Just to highlight this point slightly further. We have in the world today many groups, many political parties, many associations. And what we stated yesterday was, we slightly took the discussion to a more broader level. We said, why are we talking about Rasulullah in light of the 21st century? What is the underlying subtle theme that we want to put across? And that was that ultimately, for us to be able to appreciate Rasulullah and how he might accomplish any feat in the 21st century, how he might deal with a certain community or a certain country or a certain continent in 2014, the answer is exactly the same way in which the Imam of our time, Imam al-Mahdi ajjalallahu ta'ala faraj al-sharif, will also do. If Rasulullah managed to bring 100,000 people from Arabia of various tribes together, then in light of the 21st century, Mahdi salamullahi alayhi will bring 7.2 billion people from every country together. If Rasulullah was able to overcome ethnicity and race and remove these as factors of division, then surely Mahdi salamullahi alayhi will do the same thing with hundreds of countries and literally hundreds of languages. And so the more we ponder upon this prophetic model, the more we'll be able to appreciate the way in which the Imam of our time will accomplish the same feats, not at a geographically confined level of the Arabian Peninsula, but the globalized world that we see today, and maybe even beyond. Now, to unpack this slightly further, to be able to appreciate this and then to move forward, what was it about that personality? How did Rasulullah accomplish this? When we see our political parties today, the issue is that the political party generally stands for something that is very limited with its own sphere. They set their agenda by virtue of the name of their political party, their ethos, their own mantra. And in order to be able to diversify themselves and gather a greater vote, they often have to change their color in order to be able to bring about an extra vote. Just as an example, and I'm limited to my reading, so many people here will have more knowledge of local politics. For example, the Republican Party. The Republican Party stands for a certain ethos here in the country. Whether you agree with it or disagree with it is not the concept. They stand for their own ethos. However, it might be said that when research is done, there are certain types of communities that they don't appeal to. For example, it may be that they do appeal to a more elder community, a certain age range they tend to appeal to, which, by theory, that as you become older, you become more conservative by nature. Once you're a person of family, once you're a person who starts earning, your mindset changes, your life goal shifts. And so a different form, a different party now come to represent you. So this is the mindset. And so because it might be a certain color, or a certain age, or a certain gender that the Republican Party tend to appeal to, in order to make themselves wider when it comes to election time, and even now we're coming towards election time, correct? Even now as we come towards election time, the party will try to advertise in a way in which it appeals to certain other demographics. It now tries to appeal towards women and younger women voters. It tries to even to appeal towards the Hispanic community, which historically had been very apathetic towards the Republican Party. Think about this very carefully. Once the election is over, do you see that party remaining true to that same demographic? Why have they been pandering towards that particular demographic? Is it because they genuinely believe what they stand for? Is it because they genuinely represent that community? Is it because they genuinely want that community to be voting for them long term? Or is it a short-term gain in order to be able to win a particular election? If this is only for short term, then the reality is this is very disingenuous, isn't it? They're not doing this because they genuinely represent young women. They're not doing it because they genuinely represent immigrants. They're not doing it because they genuinely represent people of the Hispanic community. The purpose of doing this is solely to win votes. It's very, very temporary. It's very dishonest. When you are a prophet and you have to represent every demographic, it cannot be based upon, this month I choose to be able to be a person where even the Christians can come towards, or the Judaic community can come towards and they feel comfortable with me. Or today I change my tune and now I decide to reveal verses in order to make the younger women come towards the religion. This can't be the way in which we are. A personality is one in which that he finds what he represents, and that represents God, a God-centric nature. He is firm and rigid in the way in which he is. And because he is firm and rigid in morality, he does not need to pander towards any facet of a demographic, any facet of a community. He is a person where everybody appeals to him and he appeals towards everybody. He represents everybody irrespective of what demographic they come from. And so that individual is a point whereby everybody comes towards him and sees that that person is my leader. Now that's a very profound thought, because what we are saying is that Rasulullah was one man. He was one individual in his given context. Yet, every demographic of that community could point and say, he represents me and he represents my needs. If you were the tribes, he represented you. If you were the black community, he represented you. If you were the women, he represented you. If you were the Jews or the Christians, he still represented you. And this is what a prophetic personality actually is. It is a person where everybody feels that they can come in confidence to that person and not feel sidelined by virtue of whom they are. He is a person whose chest is so broad that he is willing to welcome everybody, kith and kin, foe and friend, color or otherwise, feels like that they can come towards that individual. Now, in light of that, again we highlight and just represent that personality in light of the Imam of our time. Again, look at the broadness of this community. How many languages are there in just India alone? How many religions are there in this world? How many cultures are there in this world? Nay, how many interests are there in this world today? You see, even Shi'ism is so broad today. Think about these things very carefully and the subtleties of what we are trying to say about what a human being is supposed to be like today. How a person, when they imbibe the prophetic personality into themselves, are so much in accordance with the way in which humanity actually is. Just take Shi'ism today, how broad it is. Think about this. From every culture to every language, the way in which we differ in the way we do our ma'tam, the way in which we are as scholarly figures. You will have you will have Najaf, you will have academia, you will have the West. Today, unfortunately, what we want to be is people who will create division, and we want to pigeonhole and say we represent this area of thought only. And so I want to be known solely and limited to this. A prophetic person, a person who has understood and imbibed the prophetic personality, will look beyond those very basic, unnecessary, futile modes of division. And he will not say that I look at you because you are Lebanese, I will look at you because you are Afghani, I will look at you because you are academic, and I will look at you because you're more philosophy orientated. A truly godly person finds where they can all come together at one particular point. Look at Hussain ibn Ali alayhi salam today. Just look at the way in which he is. Look at how everybody, all of us, find a way and think that he represents us. I can do my ma'tam two-handed. I can do my ma'tam sitting. I can do my ma'tam moving in a circle. I can do my ma'tam with a sword to my head or a blade to my back. I can do my ma'tam walking on fire. And yet, all of us justify and believe it by virtue of Hussain ibn Ali and the remembrance of Hussain ibn Ali. All of us find a way of coming towards that man. He is wide enough to represent us all. Yet, when I want to see Rasulullah, I want to confine him to me and me alone. I want to confine him to my sect and my sect alone. I want to confine him to my religion and my religion alone. Why is it that today Hindus are celebrating for Hussain ibn Ali? Why is it today that Christians are speaking about Hussain ibn Ali? Last year I had the honor of reciting in Bombay, in Bombay, in India. Now, anyone who has been to India will tell you how many hundreds of thousands of Shia there are in Mumbai. Hundreds of thousands of Shia. And they all come together for a julus. Every year they all come together for a julus. And of course, they have their own, issues and their own demographics and their own challenges from amongst themselves. On the day of the julus, on the day of Ashura, it is the Hindu community that come out and put water, take hoses, put water on the floor, spread it across the floor of Mumbai so that the floor of Mumbai is cooled down so that when people are walking, their feet do not become burnt. The Hindu community are participating in the julus, aiding in the julus of Hussain ibn Ali. I, on the other hand, want to make Hussain ibn Ali, want to make Rasulullah, want to make Mahdi a sectarian issue. He is my Imam, not your Imam. He is of my Ahlul Bayt, not of your companions. He represents my school of thought, not your school of thought. And so all I end up doing is dividing and dividing and dividing. I am the absolute opposite of what the prophetic personality actually is. I haven't understood the first thing of Rasulullah. Rasulullah was so wide, whereby he was able to bring everyone towards him. Every color, every strand of that community felt represented by Rasulullah. I want to be a person who divides everyone for the sake of Rasulullah. Now this is very important for us to understand. Key, foundational for us to understand in the prophetic model. Because if I am continuously creating these divisions amongst my community, amongst my sect, then there is no chance of being able to replicate that prophetic model, the way in which he, Rasulullah, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. In light of this, our next stage of discussion, after we speak about his personality, begins to talk about how he began his movement. And ultimately, he was a prophet who created the grandest of social reforms within his community. This particular word, reform, is one in which is so foundational, so key to the entire message of every single prophet that has ever come. Salamullahi alayhim ajma'een. In the Arabic language, as we may know, the word for reform is islah. Islah means to reform. Reform means to make something corrected. There has to be something wrong in order for you to reform that thing. And so there is a corrective process that takes place. Again, that movement away from where you want to, or away from where you are towards where you want to be. And so every single prophet came with the mission of reformation within their own community. Many of the ayat of the Holy Quran express this. Every prophet started their mission through expressing that this was going to be done in light of reformation. For example, in chapter number 11, Surah Al-Hud, verse number 88 of the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala quotes Prophet Shu'aib alayhi salam. Shu'aib has one line, and he says in this wonderful verse of the Holy Quran, In urid illa al-islah mastata'tu. I seek to create reformation as much as is possible for me to be able to accomplish. He recognized that there is going to be limitations as to what he can achieve. Also, he recognizes that his sphere of reformation was very particular. As we know, the story of Prophet Shu'aib alayhi salam is very much in accordance with trade and economic justice, reformation in these areas of his community. So he says, I begin my mission statement is through reformation. Elsewhere, for example, chapter 27 of the Holy Quran, Prophet Salih alayhi salam has a similar statement, whereby he says, لِمَا تَسْتَعْجِلُونَكَ بِالسَّيِّةِ قَبْلَ الْحَسَنَةِ. Why do you seek to bring forth, hasten evil before goodness? All I'm seeking to do is to bring about islah in your community, reformation within the community. A few ayat later, just 3 ayat later, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا يُصْلِحُونَ. But they did not reform themselves. And so the common theme of every prophet was that when they came to their community, their underlying mode of change was to reform the community in light of where it is to where he wants it to get to. In fact, this is something that even our A'immah salamullahi alayhim ajma'in speak about at a personal level and at the societal level. At the personal level, reformation is something that we should be seeking constantly. In the ad'iyah, the du'as, the supplications which come to us from Mafatih al-Jinan, in the daily supplications, the one for Wednesday, which comes from our 7th Imam, Musa al-Kadhim, salawatullah wa salamu alayhi. He has a line where he says, Allahumma aslih li dini. Oh my Lord, reform for me my religion. Make my religion better for me. Make my way of life better for me. Change it, corrective for me. So even this is something that we should be begging Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for in our own supplications. Notice again this concept of Islah, reformation, change within the society, is exactly the mantra of Hussain ibn Ali alayhi salam. We started the entire discussion of our series on this notion. He says, I seek to bring about Islah fi ummati jaddi Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And so from top to bottom, from first to last, the notion has always been reformation within the community. Reformation can take place in two ways. One can be a quick and an immediate movement. Another one can be a very gradual process. Generally speaking, the reformations, the revolutions that take place very quickly are doomed to fail. Or at least they have far worse and far more difficult teething processes to go through. Whenever you see a revolution, you often find that people find it difficult to be able to pick up and take all of society together. It's a very rare movement for people to be able to set about a constitution of genuine movement and national or global progress after a revolution. For example, even now, if we see within Egypt, one revolution sparks another revolution, sparks another revolution, irrespective of whether you think they are legitimate or otherwise. Or, for example, after the recent wars of the West upon places like Iraq and Afghanistan. I remember recently speaking to one brother, and I asked him a question. And I said to him, what is Afghanistan like now, after the pullout? The pullout was only a couple of days ago, right? The British troops hung up their boots and left only a couple of days ago. So my question was, now that the troops have left, what is the situation like? How do you describe it? Is it better? Is it worse? How do you find the situation on the ground? He said something very insightful. He responded by saying, in Kabul, we have very beautiful buildings being built, high-rise buildings. These are like Western buildings. They look like they're Western buildings. Unfortunately, the reality is on the ground, people are still drinking from sewer water. What does that mean? That the moment you have a very quick revolution, the moment you try to create change too quickly, and the community is not ready for that change, you may be able to fix the cracks aesthetically. You may be able to paint over the cracks and make things look beautiful aesthetically. You can have all the high-rise buildings, but if there's not come from here, and if there is not that will to partake in that revolution, if it is not genuine from all sides, it will not become fruitful. In Mecca, you can have the most beautiful of high-rise buildings. You may have the most fabulous 6-star hotels overlooking Masjid Haram, a beautiful clock tower. By God, if there is no genuine spirituality accompanying those hotels, what good are those hotels to you in the first place? And the same for any country. The same is for any country. Iraq, Iran, Britain, United States of America, even within our own homes and our own buildings. Has to be here. The revolution has to be genuine to accompany the pace of the revolution. And so the reformation of Rasulullah was never designed to be an immediate one. This is why we have 23 years. This is why we have Meccan verses and Madinan verses. This is why we have Rasulullah starting his reformation with his immediate family and then broadening his movement to other people. There was a thought process behind how he is going to make this reformation within his community. He didn't just come in front of the Holy Kaaba and start shouting, I am the Prophet of God, everybody should start following me now. There was a discernible measurement as to how this was going to be achieved. Moreover, and very important, something we're going to come back to at the end of our discussion, inshallah, the concept of imamate is proven within that concept of gradual reformation. Because Rasulullah had 23 years with his community. Could he reform them entirely in 23 years? Of course not. Can one man change an entire world? Can one man only change everything within the space of 23 years? Why is it that Rasulullah had to send 124,000 prophets if it could be done in one person? In the same way, if it can't be done in one final prophet, it requires a'imma, imams after him, to be able to expound upon that prophetic message, moving forward up until to date. Now, in light of that concept, there was a gradual reformation from Rasulullah to his community as to how he dealt with his community. Go back a few nights and what we said. We said Rasulullah, he would go up to Ghar Hira. As he would go up to Ghar Hira, what would he do? He would be observing his community, genuinely pondering upon his community. It's not that he didn't know them. It's not that he had to learn something new. He is a prophet of God. This is his servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is his fulfillment of his duty. I ask you a question in light of the subtlety of our discussions. If Rasulullah spent years upon Ghar Hira, observing, pondering upon his community, its demographics, thinking about how he was going to create his reformation, what is the awaited Savior of humanity doing at the moment? You see, our problem is we don't think about these things, these questions. We don't ponder upon our Imam. What is the Imam doing? Is he just moving from one ziyarah site to another ziyarah site? Does he just go from Masjid Jamkaran to Masjid Kufa to Masjid Sahla to Karbala to Najr to Mecca to Medina and then start the loop again? Is that all he does with his time? Is he just sitting on the musalla all day reciting tasbihat and dua kumail 24 hours a day? Is this what he does? He's a human being. He has to serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his way. He has to experience this world and fulfill his mission in accordance with his spirituality. The Imam is doing the same thing that Rasulullah did 1400 years ago. He is observing, he is pondering, he is seeing, he is appreciating, he is seeing how you and I react to everything. This is something we will talk about in more depth, inshallah. Now, in light of this, when the Prophet went towards Ghar Hira, he saw 5 primary issues with his community. And the reformation had to be dealt with these 5 primary issues of his community. The entirety of the issue of Mecca was divided into these 5. The first thing was, of course, the issue of the number of deities that they had. They did not believe in Tawheed, Wahdaniyah. And so this was the first challenge that, of course, Rasulullah had with his community. He had a community that was based on a tribal system. And so they were divided amongst themselves based on caste and creed. Number 2. Number 3, they were a community that practiced from their ancestral traditions. This is very important. Think about these things in light of our time. When we say 21st century prophet, when we say imamate, when we say we learn from these lessons. One of the trials that the Rasulullah had to go through was changing a community that found solidarity, that found their soliditude based upon how they were going to emulate the traditions of their forefathers. The 4th one was that they were a patriarchal society, very sexist. They were a community who were male-dominated, male-orientated. And the 5th one was that he came to a community that salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Takbir, Allahu Akbar, Risalat, Hadri, Muhammad wa ala Muhammad, salawat. And so the first was that Rasulullah came to a community that was based on multiplicity of gods. The second, based on a community that was following their tribal ancestors. The third, their traditions. And their 4th, based upon a patriarchal society. These are the main four that they were coming towards. In light of this, Rasulullah had to be able to reform this community. He had to be able to change this community based upon how much this community had become fostered into that way of living, into that way of thinking. He had to be able to make that change from within. The question I pose is, how did Rasulullah make this accomplishment? How did Rasulullah do this? Where did he start? How do you start with that community? And in light of that, for us to be able to ponder upon the community that we live in, and to be able to see the challenges of our era, and how ultimately the 21st century prophet, or even the Imam of our time, would make that society break from those things that were chaining them and holding them backwards. The way in which Rasulullah did this was primarily through making this a community, a thinking community. One that was not afraid to question, one that was not afraid to challenge, one that was prepared and ready to relinquish those norms of their own society that they took were gospel and established for themselves. Now think about these things in light of our own time. Where would we start today? Where did the Holy Prophet of Islam start? The problem with the community 1400 years ago, their primary issue was having been solidified into their own norms and their own practices. In order to break a community from that, a person needs to be able to find the underlying pin, the prime reason for that particular origin, or for that particular root cause, or those root causes, the origins of that particular dilemma. Rasulullah identified this in two ways. The first, of course, is that in terms of any genuine spiritual growth, one is required to find God, and one is required to have God as the center and focal point of everything that a person does. And so at an individual level and at a societal level, to be able to break that notion of the multiplicity of gods that were holding them back, and to bring them towards the unity of one God that could propel them forward. This is the first aspect. The second was to make them a thinking, challenging, open, rational community. And bringing these two things together so that they could merge for every facet of their society. What do we mean? The community, in terms of the way it was with its multiplicity of gods, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Holy Quran has such condemnation towards shirk, correct? For example, He will say that without, or a person who is a mushrik, he shall never be forgiven, correct or not? A person who is a mushrik, he shall never be forgiven for his sins. I ask a question, and I don't mean this in an unbefitting way. I want you to think about this critically, as an analysis. Think about these things as a rational human being. Think about these things in light of our theology, and how we are allowed to pose questions at every stage. God Almighty. Think about this God. This God who has created this entirety of the universe. We're talking from one end of the universe to the other end of the universe. A God who is so grand that He can create a sun which is so burningly hot, indescribable heat, and yet that heat not overcome Him in any way, shape or form. He can create 1,000,000 suns from one side of this universe. Neither is He overcome by the heat of these suns, nor the distance of these suns. Nay, He can create the heat of the hellfire. He is not overcome by it. He can create every creature down to the most singular of molecules, down to an amoeba, and He is aware of every single one of these individual creations of His. Nothing escapes His knowledge. He knows everything from what we have done to everything we will do, categorically. And the Lord is not overcome by any of this. In fact, there is a wonderful statement in the opening sermon of Nahj al-Balagha, whereby the Master ﷺ says, Allah created this universe without any testing, without any need for modification, without having to see whether His universe worked and then decided to change it and alter it. He did all of this kun fayakun. He just created it all. Now, such a grand, noble Lord, yet He can't stand something like shirk. Think about it. Okay, so I make a partner with you. I make someone son of you. I make someone equal to you. I still believe in you. Yet, shirk is that one sin that cannot be forgiven. SubhanAllah. Murder, may be forgiven. Lies may be forgiven. Fitna may be forgiven. Shirk, no chance of forgiving, according to the Zawahid al-Kalam, according to the apparency of the language of the Holy Quran. Why is it that shirk cannot be a forgivable sin? What is the reason for this? The answer is simple. Because for me to create something in my mind and make that thing a God, despite me being the one who has created it, surely has to be a debilitating intellectual disease for an individual. How can I break away and become a human being spiritually that understands Godhood, that moves in a trajectory of spiritual growth, if in my mind I have created something and yet this is my God that I have created? Doesn't make sense, does it? Something else can't penetrate into that when your mind is locked and shackled in that way. It says that I create this stone, I create this idol, I create this image, and yet I believe that it can benefit me and it has some tangible means to benefit me. Now the fact that I believe that, and the fact that I put this stone in the Kaaba, the fact that I put this model in the Kaaba, yet I go and feed it, yet I go and give rizq to it, yet I go and give rizq to it. Do you see the point? Yet I am the one that tried to give something to it, and then I seek from it. Here something has to be wrong, and so here I cannot grow in terms of my spirituality. It is a debilitating disease, and so nur, genuine nur, cannot enter into the heart. And as such, shirk is an unforgivable sin because there is no growth from that. Because of that mentality, because that community had been grounded on that point of intellectual and spiritual stagnation, Rasulullah first had to defeat that notion of shirk, that debilitating intellectual spiritual disease, in order to make that community flourish again. It was as simple as that. How do you do this? How do you do this to a community that is burying its own daughters alive? How do you do this to a community that is performing tawaf naked? How do you do this to a community that is gambling and swimming in alcohol? How do you do this to a community that is so far in tribal warfare that they even forget about what they are arguing about in the first place? Rasulullah had to break those shackles that were intellectually holding them. The things that they held to be true, Rasulullah had to reform those things that they held to be true. Problem was, the moment Rasulullah started any type of intellectual reformation, any type of moral reformation, the Quraysh community stopped it and tried to stop that movement from taking place. This is very important, very important. The story that we're about to say is key to understanding the trouble of today in the 21st century, and thus how we need to remove the trouble, and how a prophet or an imam would begin his reformation process. The narration says, one day, a great poet, one of the greatest poets of Arabia, by the name of Tufail ibn Amr. Tufail was a famous poet to the extent that, as you know, they would often have competitions, correct? And they would have annual competitions of poetry. The best poem would be hung on the door of the Kaaba, and they would be placed all around Masjid Haram, or that location at that time. People would read these things and congratulate each other. One of the most famous poets was by the name of Tufail. Tufail would come at least once a year to Mecca in order to partake in the annual ceremonies of these poetic competitions. So one day, he comes towards Mecca. As he does, he enters straight towards the area of the sanctuary of the Holy Kaaba. And as he does, he is greeted by some members of the Quraysh. The Quraysh come to him and say, Tufail, we need to tell you something, very urgently. He says, what? There's a man here by the name of Mohammad. May God peace and blessings be upon him. There is a man by the name of Mohammad. He claims to be a prophet. Beware of him. He is nothing more than a magician. And he speaks such beautiful poetic words that anyone who listens to those words, they fall foul of those words and become part of his new religion. And we're warning you of it. He's a magician. Don't listen to his words. Now, what are you finding today in the 21st century? Are you finding that the trueness of Islam is allowed to come forth? Or are you hearing Islam from other sources? Are you hearing Islam from the truest of sources today? Or are you hearing the world hears about Islam from the untrue sources of Islam? Who is speaking on behalf of Islam today? Why is it that people aren't hearing the truth of what is coming from Islam today? Do you know what Tufail says? Tufail says, I took cotton, yes, some buds of cotton or the like, and I put it in my ears, so that as I enter into the Kaaba area, I do not hear the magical words of this magician. You see, this is a great imagery for us to understand. People today have also got cotton buds in their ears. They're not listening. They don't want to listen. As much as you want people to listen, they are putting cotton. Remember we said about Nuh alayhi salam, they put their cloaks over their heads. No wonder Rasulullah said, Ma udhiya nabiyya mithla ma udhit. No wonder he said, no prophet has had to go what I have had to go through. He went through what every other prophet had to go through. Not just what one prophet had to go through. He had to undergo what all prophets had to go through. So Tufail puts this cotton in his ears. And so, as he does, he begins to perform his tawaf of the Kaaba. He says to himself, I'm Tufail. I'm one of the greatest poets of Arabia. If this man has truly great poetry, I want to hear it. Subhanallah. Can you see that? That intellectual movement that he made? Even though the world was telling him, put your fingers in your ears. He succumbed to it at the beginning, but he took time to rationalize that thought process. He took time to think about his own action, and through that he managed to remove the cotton buds in his ears. I'm the greatest poet. If he has something to say, let me listen to it. If the Bible speaks, let me listen to it. If the Quran speaks, let me listen to it. If the Ahadith has something to say, let me learn from it. Our problem today is the world has its fingers in its ears. They're not opening their ears in order to hear what is coming from us. Now, Tufail puts his fingers, he takes out that cotton, he begins to perform his tawaf. Tufail narrates, sitting was that man that everybody was trying to avoid. As I circumambulated the Kaaba, I began to hear the words of the Holy Quran. By God, I had never heard words like these before in my life. And so this man, he got up and he began to walk back towards his house. I, to fail, followed him home. I heard him continuing to recite these ayat, these verses. Eventually, he went into his house. I was so dumbfounded by these words that I had never heard the beauty of light before. I knocked on that door. The next time I exited from that same door, I had become a Muslim at the hands of Rasulullah Mohammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The beauty of this story is that it is so imagery. There's so much imagery to it about the state of where we are today. Rasulullah understood that the movement had to be an intellectual, moral movement, and through that he could reform his own society. Think about this very carefully before we conclude now. In our communities, how are the khataba and the ulama, many of them trying to reform the Muslim ummah? I heard a small speech only yesterday from a famous speaker, khatib from London. He, in his opinion, we must reform the ummah through polemics. We must debate about the khurafa, we must debate about the khawarij, we must be able to disprove everything that comes from other sects in order to reform the community. What did we say? The tool of reformation, the exemplars of reformation, come through our 14 ma'asumeen, salamullahi alayhim ajma'een. If you look at them, every one of them had to undergo a different modality in order to reform their community. The second Imam, during his time, salamullahi alayhi, he was someone who created a peace treaty in order to keep the community moving forward. If you look at our fourth Imam, he instituted Risalat al-Huquq, Sahifa al-Sajjadiyya, the practice of azar in order to reform his community. Our sixth Imam engaged in teaching in order to reform his community. Each of our 14 did them in various ways. They did not primarily focus on polemics and debate within sects. Can you see that? Which Imam focused purely and primarily on, I'm going to debate your school of thought and your school of thought and your school of thought? In fact, it was the other way round. Our eighth Imam, despite having the heir apparency, he would sit in his house, and only when the Caliph al-Rashid called him to debate would he go out and debate. Otherwise he wouldn't go out and debate. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Ud'u ila rabbika sabila bil hikmati wal mawdi'atal hasana." Call towards the way of your Lord through wisdom and goodly exhortation. Here we need to expound upon this more tomorrow. We're setting the scene for the discussion that reformation has to take place in a certain way. The way in which each of our Imams did it. Rasulullah had to take out that underlying pin that blocked anything from coming in here and anything coming in from there. And he challenged people to think. And he asked them to challenge the way in which they were living in this world. This is something, inshallah, we will pick up tomorrow as we continue the discussion of reformation and the prophetic model of reformation. Hussain ibn Ali alayhi salam begins his mission through the mission statement of reformation. I'm not rising because this is out of folly, or because I'm seeking fame, or a big name, or because I'm oppressive. I'm rising in order to bring about reformation in the community, ummah of my grandfather. So everything that was accomplished was done under the concept of reforming his own community. When you reform, you will reform it in one of two ways. You will reform it through the gradual cycle, or you will reform it through the revolution. Hussain ibn Ali saw a man, a drunkard, a man that would play with children, a man that would play with animals, a man that would play chess, and a man that ultimately would even dare to take a stick and hit it across the teeth of the grandson of Rasulullah and say, "Oh Hussein, what beautiful set of teeth you had." When you have a man like this, the revolution is not gradual. It cannot be anything other than to unsheath your sword and to challenge that man, to challenge that army, and to say, "I will undo the very notions of what puts you in power." And so, in order to accomplish such a feat, what needs to be done is to have people of the highest caliber with you. Hussein, he had the companions like Muslim ibn Awsaja and Habib ibn Madahir. Habib was a childhood friend of Hussein ibn Ali. Think about this very closely. We all have those friends of ours, close, dear friends of ours, especially if you are the youth now. But as an elder, you often go and find that your friends change over a period of time. You don't have the same friends that you have when you were 15 or 30. They change. Habib was the friend who stayed with Hussein ibn Ali from his youth until his very elder age, to the point that when Habib entered into that battlefield from Kufa and met his dear, elderly, beloved friend, he said, "Oh my master and Imam Hussain, I am elder, but when I look at you, youth flows through my veins once again." This was that great companion of his. Hussein ibn Ali writes a letter to his dearest of friend, Habib. Imagine it is you who have called your friend for aid. And then, when your friend comes to you, he gives himself to the point where he is struck on his head and his chest is opened for you. How would you be having to see that long friend of yours, that lifetime friend of yours giving his life for you? How might you feel if this was your Habib, brothers and sisters? And so he writes that letter towards Habib and says, "Oh Habib, indeed you are a scholar and a jurist. I am heading towards Karbala. I have received your letter, and now I call you towards me in order to partake in this reformation, this revolution that we are going to embark on." Habib takes this letter to his companion Muslim ibn Awsaja. Muslim is the same age, he is from the same tribe of Banu Asad. And he comes and says to his dear friend Muslim ibn Awsaja, "Oh Muslim, I have received this letter from our master Hussein." Muslim says, "What are you waiting for? Do you not know that our Imam is waiting for us on the plains of Karbala?" It is said that Muslim was a person who had henna in his hand at that moment, ready to be dyeing his beard. As his companion Habib comes into that house, he takes that henna and he throws it away and says, "By God, I will dye my beard with my blood in defense of Hussein ibn Ali." And so, as he does, he begins to leave. Habib ibn Madahir takes one of his servants and says to him, "Put this horse, go and wait for us outside Kufa." As he does, his servant is waiting for him and thinks to himself, "If my master does not come, then I will leave without him." His two companions come, and eventually these riders enter towards the battlefield of Karbala. All along, Hussein ibn Ali was waiting for his dearest friend Habib. It is said that as they entered towards the tents and started putting down their tents, Imam took alam after alam and he gave it to various members of his army and said, "Oh Abbas, you take this standard. Oh Akbar, you take this standard." It is said that there was one standard left waiting on the grounds of Karbala, and so they turned to him and said, "Oh Hussain, whom will you give this last standard to?" He says, "The one whose standard this belongs to is riding now from Kufa. He will come towards us." Another narration says that as he was doing so, he was handing out spears to all of his family members and companions and saying, "Take this spear, take this spear." Again, there was one spear left. He is asked, "Whom does this spear belong to?" He says, "The one whom this spear belongs to is coming towards us at this moment." At that time, he says that his companion Muslim and Habib are riding towards Karbala. As they come, Imam Hussain and the companions come to welcome him. There is a great tumult outside the tent as they begin to welcome the dear friend Habib. At this moment, Sayyidah Zainab turns towards the sisters, turns towards the ladies and says, "Who is it that has come? Why is there such a tumult outside the tents?" They come and find out that Habib has come and there is an air of celebration with the tents. Sayyidah Zainab turns towards and says, "Send my salutation towards Habib." Habib receives this salutation and responds by saying, who is Habib to receive the salutations of Sayyidah Zainab?" Imagine, brothers and sisters, that you serve the Imam of your time so much that Sayyidah Zainab comes and gives you salutations. Imagine you serve Hussain ibn Ali so much that Fatima al-Zahra comes and gives you salutations on the Day of Judgment. And so Habib ibn Madahir responds hurt, saying, whom is Habib that can receive the salutations of Sayyidah Zainab? At this moment, now it comes towards the day of Ashura, the heat of the battle. Many of the companions have gone and died in the morning, and now the children are beginning to be overcome by their thirst. It is said now that at this moment, Muslim ibn Awsaja, it is his time when he wants to go in towards the battlefield. The narrations say that every time one of the companions wanted to go into the battlefield, they had this time, they would come towards Hussain ibn Ali and say, Ya Aba Abdullah, alaykum minni salam, accept my salutation. And this was the way in which they would suggest to the Imam they want to go into the battlefield. The Imam looked towards Muslim ibn Awsaja and says, "Oh Muslim, will you now depart from me as well? I have lost so many of my friends, so many of my companions today, will you go?" He says, "Indeed Imam, I wish to be able to go. Indeed Muslim, I give you permission, enter in towards the battlefield." Muslim rushes in towards the battlefield like a brave lion and begins to send many of the enemies towards hellfire. It is said that Muslim is struck down and he falls towards the floor. But this time when he falls towards the floor, it is not just Hussain that comes rushing towards his aid, but Hussain and Habib ibn Madahir come towards the aid of Muslim. They sit down beside the broken body of Muslim, and Habib looks towards his friend and says, "Oh my dear friend, if I did not have certainty that in a few minutes time I would be following you to the next world, I would ask from you your last will and testimony. Please, is there anything that I could do for you?" In the last moments of strength, Habib is looked at. In the last moments of strength, Muslim ibn Awsaja raises his finger and points it towards Hussain ibn Ali. He says, "Oh my dear friend, my last wish in this world is you protect this man with everything that you have." At this moment, Habib ibn Madahir, he hugs his companion and says, "Oh Muslim, I promise you with everything that I have, you will not become disappointed in your companion today, for surely everything that I have will be given in the way of my master Abu Abdullah al-Hussain." They bring the body back towards the tent, and the women begin to wail and cry over such a companion as Muslim ibn Awsaja. But in a few minutes, it will be Habib as well that they are mourning over. The narration says, as the battle enraged, it now came up, approaching towards the time of Salatul Dhuhr. One of the companions by the name of Abu Thamama, he turned towards Hussein and he says, "Oh my master Hussein, it is now time for prayer. Maybe we can ask the enemies to give us a short break in order to be able to pray our salah." He says to them, he says towards his companion, "May Allah bless you and make you and raise you from amongst those who establish salah. May we also be amongst those people as well." He says, "May Allah raise you on the day of judgment amongst those who establish and protect the salah." He says, "Go towards the enemy and seek a break from the war so we may pray our prayers." At this moment, as they begin to ask, one of the enemies by the name of Hussein ibn Numair, he shouts out, "Oh Hussein ibn Ali, do you think that your prayer will be accepted by God?" Imagine the audacity of these individuals that they shout out towards Hussein, "Will your prayer be accepted?" At this moment, Habib ibn Madahir, he becomes enraged by this statement. He turns towards his master. He says, "Oh my master Hussein, I don't wish to pray salah except in the heavens, and I wish to only now give my salutations towards your grandfather Rasulullah, and I wish to be able to be in the company of your father Ali ibn Abi Talib, and I wish to be sitting in the company of your brother Hassan ibn Ali. Please allow me to go and destroy these enemies." At this moment, Hussein turns towards his dear companion and allows him to enter into the battlefield. I ask you, O Hussein, how did you feel at that moment allowing Habib to enter into the battlefield? That special beloved friend of yours, knowing that next time you see him, there will be a spear impaled into his chest. Habib enters into that battlefield and he begins to send the enemies towards hellfire. It is said that he strikes 62 of the enemies down. They begin to encircle him. They begin to strike him from the front and from the back. One person comes towards him from the front. As he begins to attack him, a man comes from behind and strikes a sword upon the head of Habib. As he begins to fall from the horse, another man flings a spear in towards his chest. He falls towards the floor. But Habib, he didn't stop fighting to the extent that even when he was on the floor, he received a third killer blow. Someone came with a sword and struck him on the head again. At this moment, he calls out for his master, "Alaykum minni salam. Accept my final salutation, O Abu Abdullah." Hussein runs towards his beloved Habib. He runs towards him and sits down beside him. "Oh my dear Habib, there has not been a death today that has struck me like your death. Oh Habib, I always knew that you would be there for me, but now you are departing from me. After you, oh Habib, whom do I have with me?" At this moment, he begins to embrace Habib for that final time. As Habib's soul departs from this world, Hussein turns towards his friend and says, "Oh Habib, by God, you are of those who used to recite the whole Quran in one night." Habib's body is returned back towards the tents. Hussein ibn Ali now begins his prayer, that one rak'ah that he is going to recite as Salatul Khawf. He places two people in front of him to defend himself and to defend those prayers from the attacks of the enemies. One of those is Suhail ibn Qaym, and there is another companion standing in front. He begins to pray that one rak'ah. Those companions begin to pray that one rak'ah. But at this moment, Umar ibn Sa'ad turns towards his companions and the enemies and says to them, Hussein is praying. Whilst they are praying, attack them. They put arrows in their bows. They loft those in the air. They send those arrows in towards the air, and they begin to strike at those companions who were surveying. They were striking at those companions who were in front of our Imam. It is said that one of those companions, he was standing directly in front of Hussein ibn Ali. Arrow after arrow flung itself towards him. He received several arrows in his body. Hussein, having finished his prayer, that companion was still standing upright, ready to defend his Imam. He turns towards his Imam and says to him, "O Aba Abdullah, have I fulfilled my covenant of defending you? Have I fulfilled my covenant of ensuring your safety?" At this moment, Hussein turns to him and says, "By God, you have fulfilled your covenant. Go and precede me before heaven. Go and await me in heaven." At this moment, that companion who took those arrows in his chest, he falls towards the floor and his soul departs from this world. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أيهم القلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the reappearance of the awaited Saviour, to allow us to be alongside Him at all times in our life and in our death. If we are to pass away from this world before His coming, to raise us from our graves so that we may partake in the victory of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. Ya Allah, there are many people around the world going through such desperate times. Those people in a state of war and oppression, homelessness and poverty, lack of education, natural disaster and disease. Ya Allah, grant them all safety, security and victory for the sake of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. Ya Allah, allow us to perform the ziyarah of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein this year and every year. And for our Imam, allow us to be the Habib ibn Mutahir. Wassalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Matim al-Hussein, Ya Hussein.